Hey guys, Coffee Cranks here, and today I'm back with another video on Path of Exile. For those of you new to my channel, in Path of Exile Settlers of Kalgur, I league started in SSF playing Poison SRS. Sadly, my SSF experience was rather short, and I do talk about it in the video that I'll link in the description below. However, the build turned out to be pretty good, and after obtaining the last pieces of gear, I wanted to release the final guide. For the people who have been following my journey and my build, I will provide changelog section in this video, so you don't have to watch the entire video, and you can just check out what was changed compared to the previous versions of the build. If you want to see how this build looks in maps, just go to the end of the video. Now let's talk about my favorite part, the numbers. So the build has roughly 46 million DPS, which is using Awaken Multistrike. So if you're playing in trade, Awaken Multistrike is maybe 150 divines, so unless you have access to that, it's more like 40 million DPS. I cannot tell you the full price of the build because I league started an SSF and I already had a bunch of items there. However, each slot should not be more than 5 divines, so you can make upgrades fairly often. And 5 divines are like the best items that are listed in the endgame version, gear for Animated Guardian, or really expensive Spectres. So in the beginner version of the build, most things will not cost you more than 50 cows. When it comes to defensive layers, you have spell suppression capped unfortunately at 93% only, and the reason is this wheel was nerfed, so yeah, you cannot really easily get to 100% anymore. However, I didn't really feel the need to be at 100%, it was totally fine, and that is because you also have block chance capped, so both block chance and spell block. You also have 76% max res, however, this is nothing to write home about. This is just a nice addition. This build is 100% SSF viable. In fact, I league started with it in SSF and I was able to easily unlock all of my Atlas. For the majority of the maps, I was actually using a 4-link because I didn't find a 5-link or a 6-link. So if you have access to a 6-link, you're gonna have a much easier time. When it comes to hardcore, I would say this build is not hardcore viable, unfortunately, because I did die quite a few times, and especially at the beginning of the leveling, it was a little bit squishy. Now, once I got all my defensive layers up, the build felt really tanky, and now I barely die ever. The build is versatile and can do well in all kinds of scenarios. Some of the league mechanics that I was running this league were breaches, sanctum, and blights. So for the folks in SSF and just generally, I included an extensive leveling section in POB together with the crafting section. So if you want to know how to level this build or how to craft your gear, it's all in the POB notes. Summon Raging Spirit is a gem that creates a bunch of minions who do physical damage. Then 100% of that physical damage gets converted into fire damage. Now with Poison SRS, it's a little bit different because you will use Unnatural Strength, which is a node from the Necromancer Ascendancy. This node grants minions Unholy Might, which converts 100% of their physical damage into chaos damage. But wait a minute. Don't we already have 100% of physical to fire conversion from the gem? Yes, we do. But the way it works in Path of Exile is that any damage conversion is applied at the same time as innate conversion from the minions. So what this means is that instead of 100% physical damage being converted to only fire or 100% of physical damage being converted to only chaos, you get 50% of physical damage being converted to fire and 50% being converted to chaos. Honestly, if you didn't know this, I wouldn't blame you because I didn't either. Now, because poison damage is chaos damage, we can now scale poison damage. Now, with a belt, you can only get up to, let's say, 40% chance to poison for your minions. However, then you can add the United in Dream Sword, which gives you another 60%. The way we do this is by utilizing Darkness Enthroned unique belt, which basically amplifies the effect of socketed Abyss Jewels, together with Abyss Jewels that give your minions a chance to poison on hit. So before you get access to the sword, you can simply use Chance to Poison gem, which gives you 40%. Not as good as the sword, but close enough. Not only is there a leveling section, which details everything in the campaign, there is also a tree progression, so you can just follow that and see what to pick up first and what to pick up next, and so on. For the Ascendancy, you want to take Commander of Darkness first, then Mindless Aggression, then Unnatural Strength, and the last one, Mistress of Sacrifice. Mistress of Sacrifice is the last one because it gives you a bunch of block chance, and block is only really important in later maps. At first you won't really feel the difference because the monsters are just not that dangerous. You might also wonder why Eldritch Battery is on the tree, and the reason is the following. Normally Energy Shield protects your life, however when you take Eldritch Battery, Energy Shield starts protecting your mana, so when you use skills such as Summon Raging Spirit, and you will have to use that a lot, Energy Shield will be spent before your mana costs, so that means that even when you have low mana, Eldritch Battery helps you to cast skills as long as you have Energy Shield. You might also know that in the endgame version there is a cluster right over here. Normally with large cluster jewels you want at most 8 passive skills and definitely not 12. So how come does this one have 12? That is because cluster jewels are the best way to scale minion damage. Minion builds don't actually have a lot of nodes on the tree for minion damage. They have a bunch of defensive nodes, but minion damage is very limited. Now if you look at this cluster, every little node gives me minions deal 10% increased damage. So when you count all the nodes together, suddenly you have a lot of increased minion damage. Another important thing here is Blessed Rebirth, which comes from the medium cluster jewel. Now Blessed Rebirth is really good for SRS, because minions created recently, aka in the past 4 seconds, cannot be damaged. Now why is this good? Well, normally when you cast SRS, you will probably cast it once every 4 seconds roughly. So that means that all your minions constantly get immortality, at least for the first 4 seconds, and then the new minions are created, so it doesn't really matter past that point. So if you want to do the experiment, you can run a map without this node and with this node, and you will definitely notice the difference. You will have to recast constantly without Blessed Rebirth, but with Blessed Rebirth you actually don't have to cast as much. They also have another defensive layer, which is they recover 5% of life on minion death, so when another Raging Spirit dies, the other ones recover 5% life. I briefly wanted to mention the loadouts, which is a fairly new feature in POB. So the way this works, there are 2 loadouts here, and if you switch between them, you will see everything change, including the gems, the gear, everything, the tree. So you can basically not alter everything manually, but just go into the loadout and choose the loadout, and everything will be changed, and you will see the gear and the gems corresponding to that loadout. So the first one is basically after you finish the campaign, and the second one is for endgame. And by the way, endgame section basically has best in slot items, so you don't have to get them all at the same time. It's just so you can see what you're aiming for as your final, best gear. And also do follow the notes, because they do explain the progression and what to get first and what to get last. Now, I'm not going to cover everything because the notes are pretty explicit and I spent a lot of time writing this just so I don't have to talk about it in the video. However, I do want to point out the key moments about this. In Act 2, you complete the quest Deal with the Bandits. Normally, Deal with the Bandits gave you 2 passive points and everybody was taking 2 points and basically ignoring the bandits themselves. However, in the recent patch, GGG updated this, so the quest only now gives you 1 passive point. So when you're leveling in the campaign, that 1 point actually is not that meaningful, so I actually recommend getting a Lyra instead and getting plus 15 to all elemental resistances, because it's going to help you a lot. You absolutely should switch to 1 passive point later on in your endgame version, because you will just have enough resistances on the gear, and at that point that 1 passive point is more important to you. Next, I wanted to mention Pantheon. For the Major God, I always take Soul of the Brine King, because you cannot really beat that. You get freeze immunity and you get stun immunity, or almost immunity. Now for the minor Pantheon, I recommend to start with Soul of Shakari, because at the very beginning, after you finish the campaign, your chaos resistance will probably be quite low, and most of my deaths at early mapping happened because of poison damage, so I think Soul of Shakari is gonna really help you with that. Later on, make sure to switch to Soul of Aberath, because Aberath gives you immunity to Burning Ground with the upgrade, and that is really important because there are lots of maps with Burning Ground And once you get Chaos Resistance, like the Chaos Ground doesn't really do anything. However, Burning Ground just really sucks. For the crafting, you can follow POB nodes if you're an SSF. In trade, I do recommend you to just buy gear because honestly, most of the time it's cheaper that way. The only things that you might need to craft are the implicits for Syrian Exarch and Eater of the Worlds. But I did make sure to run a bunch of simulations in Craft of Exile to make sure the probabilities are not too low for crafting the gear in SSF. And you don't need really crazy mods on it, just the basic ones, spell suppression. You do want to pick up fractured bases, of course, because crafting on a non-fractured base is just real pain, no matter what. Now for the Spectres, you want to start with 2 Carnage Chieftains, later on you add on a Host Chieftain when you get to Act 7, and then once you reach tier 17s, you can think about better Spectres. So for example, 2 Arena Masters and the Pale Seraphim will give you a good combo of increased attack and movement speed for the minions, as well as reduce your enemy's action speed. All these Spectres are pretty easy on the eyes, and I would absolutely recommend sticking to those if you really don't want any clutter. However, if you really don't care and you're okay not seeing what's happening on the screen, then I highly recommend Affliction Corpses. Now what you want with Affliction Corpses Spectres, you want 1 Hulk and Miscreation. It doesn't have to be a perfect one, just a normal Hulk and Miscreation, but not the imperfect one. So the imperfect one doesn't have that, you need at least a normal one. It gives your SRS 100% increased damage and 30% attack speed. Next you want a perfect Forest Warrior, which gives your minions Onslaught and Culling Strike. Now Culling Strike might also come from Kingmaker, which you put on Animated Guardian, but if you don't have that, then it also gives you Culling Strike. Onslaught is really hard to get, so there is one node on the tree, it's called Ravenous Horde. Minions have 30% chance to gain Onslaught on kill. However, this will only affect the minion that does the kill, but not the other minions, whereas this Onslaught from the Spectre will affect all of your minions. The last but not the least is the perfect Forest Tiger. Now this guy is pretty pricey in trade, it cost me around 8 divines, and the reason it's so expensive is because it actually gives you an aura. It gives you haste, so you can drop your haste and he will cost you haste instead, and you can replace your haste with something else, like in this case I replaced it with Benevolence. So keep in mind, and this is super important, please don't ignore it. If you ever lose Affliction Corpses, they're gonna be permanently gone. You cannot desecrate them. You also cannot weapon swap. If they're in your weapons, do not ever weapon swap, even in town, because you will absolutely lose them forever. Now, I don't know if GGG will ever change that, or maybe it's intentional, because these Spectres are quite frankly very powerful. So maybe the idea is that they give you more power at the cost of this risk. But I will say this again, if you do not like clutter, do not get these Spectres. Honestly, the damage will be totally fine without. I was running with tier 17 Spectres and it was totally fine, and I was doing Sanctums just fine. Of course, these Spectres give you roughly more damage, but it's not worth it if you absolutely hate clutter. I know I'm speaking on behalf of all Spectre users. GGG, please give us MTX to completely disable Spectre skills, because right now it can be really bad. Next is Animate Guardian, who has his own section in POB nodes together with gear progression. Make sure to get 2120 Animate Guardian gem before you put stuff on him like Kingmaker. Same, by the way, applies for Spectre gems, which in my case I'm still running around with 2020 gem, and I have this Spectre for 8 divines, so that's probably a really bad idea. Don't be like me. So people used to recommend Ambush Charge as a budget body armor for Animated Guardian, but now it's not good anymore. And the reason is, it used to give you Endurance Charge when you take a critical strike. But now it only gives you +2 maximum endurance charges when you take a critical strike. But if you don't have any way to generate endurance charges, like in the case of Animated Guardian, he's not gonna benefit from it. It also lost the mod to give you life regen on hit, so yeah, Ambush Charge is kinda not really good right now. You can use any of the cheap body armors instead, such as Blood Bond, Belly of the Beast, or Carcass Jack, so all three of these are really nice. And generally you always want to go for either increased maximum life or life regen for Animated Guardian, because you just want him to survive. You don't care about how much damage he's doing, you want him to survive and provide some benefits for other minions. Now the last thing I wanted to talk about is Multistrike versus Melee Splash. So this is not an obvious thing. At the very beginning of the journey with this build, you definitely want to use Melee Splash for map clear, and you can swap to Multistrike for tough bosses, such as for example Eater of the Worlds. However, once you obtain all the gear from the endgame section, you should stop using Melee Splash and perma switch to Multistrike even when you clear the maps. It's actually really good clear, and the reason is because of Asena's touch on the Animated Guardian, which give you nice explosions, kinda looks like Profane Bloom, so that will help for clear and you don't really need Melee Splash anymore. Now for the folks who were following the build before, I updated POB nodes, specifically leveling section, I fixed some typos there. I added the crafting section, which wasn't there before. I believe I fixed something in Animated Guardian section, but I'm not quite sure. I added new Affliction Corp Spectres, which weren't there before, and I also added it to the POB nodes. Spell suppression went down from 99% to 93%, so make sure to check out the latest version of the tree. I made some changes to the rare gear in the endgame version of the build, and that is because I realized some things were just not really easy to craft in SSF. In particular, I am not using bone rings anymore and instead using amethyst rings. And because of all these changes, your final reward from the Bandits quest should be +1 passive point once you have enough resistances. So that's it for today's video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and I hope it was informational. I was really trying to cut it shorter, but it just turned out to be pretty long anyway. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll be happy to see you on my stream. I stream at twitch.tv/coffeecranked. Nowadays I stream on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, guaranteed, and I also try to stream more than that, maybe on Fridays and Saturdays. Stop by to say hi, otherwise I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!